and I to be looking at empty seats. So come on up. Who's going to do it? There's Kate Colby. Now we're talking. Yeah, whatever. Move on up. Get close.
Yes.
Is Maria's mic up, guys?
It is, I think. Yes.
You feel good about
yeah?
that?
Can everyone hear me?
Okay.
All right, perfect.
Great. First of all, the
Lovely.
first thing we need to do, and it's also going to be the last thing that we do, and probably in the middle too, is to put our hands together and thank Maria Konnikova for joining us today. Yay. We are thrilled. So exciting. And when Maria told us what the itinerary was, we're even more thrilled because Thrilder, it's the writer's house. I think it's a single syllable word, ER has to be. So Thrilder. Anyway, I'm already in a deep hole here. So Maria's just here briefly and then going back far away. So I didn't realize it would be like a big trip just to come and hang out at the writer's house. And there aren't like 15 Philly gigs. You're going right back.
I am.
So that's another reason for the second time to put our hands together for Maria. Thank you for coming such a long way.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you are welcome. It's most welcome. I also want to introduce a couple of friends here who have made this whole thing possible. Actually, three. First of all, Mingo Reynolds, who is somewhere. Mingo, where are you? Come, Mingo. Please say hello.
There she is.
Mingo. Mingo is wearing a Phillies top. And look, show off the hat. This is a special Christmas kind of Phillies celebrate Christmas. Didn't Philly fans throw snowballs at Santa Claus? I'm sorry. I knew that would happen. I just say these things about Philly fans. I'm so sorry. Anyway, Mingo coordinates our Weber Symposium events and has had a hand, well, more than a hand, really made this whole thing, this whole evening possible, including arranging for the yummy food. And so can we acknowledge Mingo Reynolds in the back there? Thank you, Mingo. You're the best. I don't know how many years ago it was, Stacy and Jeff. 13 years ago, I'll tell a quick version of this story. I got a call from both of you, or anyway from Stacy. We've been thinking about this a long time. We really want to support Penn, but we think maybe supporting the Wharton School is, I don't know, bringing coals to Newcastle, or what? What is supporting the Wharton School is, I don't know, drop in the bucket. We like the Writer's House. We're not so sure you guys would be interested in featuring an annual event. I guess it became, in my mind, an annual event where we celebrate a writer who writes beautifully about things like, for a long time, strictly speaking, economics and finance, but now extended to decision-making and risk-taking and all these things that you wouldn't normally find in the everyday event schedule of the Kelly Writer's House. And so Jeff and Stacy have supported this program through an endowment, which, for those of you not familiar with how that works, it's a fund that keeps on giving interest. Even in a bad year like this, we get lots of interest because of the way Penn handles it. And so you've made this possible permanently, and we've had 13 of these events, and some of you have been to a bunch of them. And it's a really great evening, and I just wanted to thank you both. You came from New York for this on a World Series evening, even though, right? Jeff's like, Maria and Al, you're already talking too slowly. And we're so grateful. We love you guys so much. And Stacy is a member of our advisory board, and thank you all. Can we thank them too? It's been fun. It's been crazy and fun. Maria, thank you in advance for this. We're going to spend an hour, maybe an hour and 5 minutes just talking. I have some questions. I've read this book twice. I just very recently read this book for a second time, and there's other Konnikova, Iana, that I have read. But I want to focus on these two books. And The Confidence Game is the older of the two, and we don't have copies to sell here, but it is easily available. I mean, it's published by Penguin. I'm sure they keep it in print. And this book, which is the newer of the two books, The Biggest Bluff and The subtitle is an alluring one for people at a university in particular. How I Learned to Pay Attention, Master Myself, and Win. Was that your?
That was my editor.
Your editor. I was going to say, that does not sound like you.
My editor was my original subtitle. He's like, how about win? And I was like, how about not? And he's like, no, how about win?
How about win? Yes. You're ultimately not in charge. There are things you cannot control, which is a thing you learn from this book. Anyway, of course, there's the design of all these cards, including the hated Queen of Spades in some games, floating around as if you've just given up that hand. It's just floating into the air. Anyway, this book is available for sale here, and it is, believe it or not, $8. How did we do that? The Writers' House doesn't make money, so we buy them as we can and sell them to you. And if you buy this book before, a few minutes afterwards, I'm sure Maria would be willing to sit here for a few minutes. If you buy this book,
absolutely,
I'm sure Maria would be willing to inscribe it for you. So,
yes.
And there'll be some time somewhere when I sort of run out of things to say, there're going to be some time for you to ask a question, and we have a portable mic somewhere, do we, guys? We have a portable mic, so yep. Thank you.
Great.
All right, great. I wanted to start with your grandmother, Baba Anya, and I want to, in a minute, ask you to read a passage. Oh, gosh, you're going to be reading my copy. Can someone run and get a clean copy from the sale table, because it's got... Oh, look at that. This is what... Never mind. Got it, Andrew. This is what friends are for, because otherwise, how embarrassing all of my marks.
No, it's wonderful.
Yes.
I love marked up books.
Poetry professor says
books
all
are
kinds
meant
of
to
things.
be written.
Yes. Oh, I believe so. Anyway, you told your everybody else seems okay with the idea of taking a leave and learning how to play poker and writing a book about it. Everybody was on board except your grandmother. I mean, there must have been others who were skeptical. But I wonder if we could look at the passage where you talk about her reaction and then talk about it. So this would be, Maria, on page 45.
And from where would you like me to read?
I have it all marked out. I think that to that.
All right,
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So by way of background, for people who have not read The Biggest Bluff, I got my PhD in psychology from Columbia, and then ended up writing my first book while I was still in grad school, and became a full-time writer as soon as I got my degree. Almost didn't finish my degree, but did at the end of the day.
I'm sure your grandmother was pleased that you finished the degree.
Yes, my grandmother was very pleased, and she always thought that I'd be a professor, that was kind of what I wanted to do.
Really,
yes, yeah. But she was fine when I started writing for The New Yorker. Like, that was okay. And so this passage takes place when I tell my family that I'm taking a leave of absence from The New Yorker to play poker full time. Baba Anya is not convinced. Poker may teach you that nothing is certain, but she is still positive I'm going over to the dark side. I realize that nothing I say will change her mind. She waves away all my talk of skill with a dismissive hand. She has more arguments in mind. But this isn't serious, she says. Skill or no skill, there is one other element of this whole thing that bothers her. It's only a game. How can you be serious about a game? She wants me to be a professor. Now that's serious business. A real job. A skilled job. Until it isn't. The more I think about it, the more I start doubting just how much of a gamble-free endeavor it could be. Imagine me going down the academic path. What did I choose to study? Social psychology. But neuroscience is having a moment. I may have followed my interest, but not the job market. With whom did I study? Good luck to me getting a job in any psychology department where the big 5 personality traits are still big. I studied with Walter Mischel, and he and the big 5 are not on speaking terms. What about academic publications? Who might get assigned to review my manuscript? Someone with a sympathetic ear, or someone who thought my research was so much hogwash? I'm not going to get kicked out of a poker tournament for choosing a style of play that goes counter to the strategy of the bigwigs of the day and may challenge their ascendance. But if I were to go against the head of a department or hiring committee, or even one of the celebrity hotshot professors, bye-bye job prospects. In many ways, poker is the skilled endeavor. The job market is the gamble. How did my job talk go? Where did I go to college, to grad school? Did I rub someone the wrong way in an interview? These details, all subject to a big dose of chance, can make or break me. At the table, I play how I play, and I rise or fall on my own merits.
In other words, Maria, academia has greater uncertainty than poker.
Absolutely. And not just greater uncertainty, but a greater element of personal bias and psychology.
Exactly.
Which the irony, of course, is that psychologists experience it just as much as any other profession, even ones who study biases, right? They're going to exhibit those exact same biases against me. And if I call them out on it, I'm going to be shown the door. They're not going to be like, oh my God, thank you so much for pointing out that this was a very biased decision, that I'm working, based on thin sliced judgments, that I'm, motivated by this and that I'm, that I'm not looking at all the available evidence, that I'm, being a little bit unfair and judging you unfairly. Thank you, Maria. You're hired.
It's a beautiful moment in a book. By the way, a very readable book. Beautifully written. It is a beautiful moment to bring it up because it's your grandmother is the very person who should get the logic of what you say to us. You probably didn't say it to her. If you want me to have a certain future, a more certain future, then academia is the wrong thing.
Yes, absolutely. And she not only did she not buy, there's another, I didn't know which Baba Anya passage you were going to have me read, because there's another one where she just looks at me in horror and says, "You're going to become a gambler?"
Yes,
and
right.
that, like, I don't know how
she's
still alive. She's 97 years old.
Oh my goodness.
And 97, and still she was horrified. So, she thought that this book would be the end of it, and that afterwards I would finally become a professor. So she's horrified that didn't happen.
Having read a lot,
but I'm at UPenn, so she'd be happy.
Oh, she's watching. Anya, see, we can give you an honorary degree.
Lecture. Yes, thank
exactly.
you. I appreciate
a lecture. These books are about so many different topics, and one of them obviously is risk-taking, decision-making, how we cling to status quo longer than we should, knowing when to fold and how to fold, and belief, the whole problem of sticking to beliefs. But there are two things they are about that I'm really interested in this next hour to talk about, if you will.
Yeah.
One is about living with uncertainty, learning to live with uncertainty, which everybody in this room, especially if you're part of the university, have to face every day. And the other is storytelling. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in there, that's really what my interest is. And you write so beautifully about storytelling, but we'll get to that later. So I want to turn to a related passage. It's on 139. This is where you make what by then doesn't seem an astounding claim, but will maybe out of context, that poker is meritocratic, a meritocracy of sorts, and democratic, the poker world. And I would love for you to read that, 139, and then we'll talk about that because it's an amazing point.
Sure.
Where
are we reading?
Just that paragraph?
From It's Not Perfect? Or from
there to down to
okay, perfect. Everyone is allowed. No one will turn you away because you didn't come from the right school or have the right connections or diplomas. If you can afford the buy-in, you can play. Simple as that. There's no interview process where a hiring manager can decide you rubbed them the wrong way. This eerily similar to academia, yes. You're not penalized for bad social skills or annoying habits. Unlike other sports, there's no need to be genetically endowed with the right height or musculature. If you're blind, deaf, or any other way physically impaired, you can still play. Indeed, many a player started from a hospital bed where no other activities were possible. I've met more than one who has called poker a literal lifesaver. There's no unspoken wall of what you are or aren't supposed to do, say, or be. All you have to do is play poker well. If your skill is good enough that you've earned the right to play, welcome. It's what America hopes to be, but never, not in any other profession, actually is. I'm going to read two more sentences just because, of course, it's not perfect. Yeah. There's no such thing as actual meritocracy. Yeah. And then the next paragraph is about why poker isn't actually a meritocracy.
But still,
it's more of a meritocracy than other things.
This is a radical book, people. It's a radical book. Poker is what America hopes to be. And you prove it. So not so crazy a move. And the other thing that you do, and you're very generous about this, is you tell us about your life, your personal life and your background, just enough so we know what a bold and radical thing you've done by doing this, by being a risk taker. You have a recollection at a certain moment when you were 6 years old, and this is an ongoing thing, not that at this age you're going to go to a playground and try to do this, but you couldn't hang upside down.
I still
Did I get that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
You know that
Too
thing.
afraid.
You know that thing where you like hook your legs over the bar and then you let go and you hang upside down, and all the kids do it, and it looks totally effortless. To this day, I am just petrified. I can't do it. Could never do it. I always just picture myself like my brain splattered on on the ground below. And when I was a morbid 6-year-old. As a 6-year-old, this is exactly what I pictured. Where my sisters were like little monkeys all over the place. I was just sitting there saying, "You guys go ahead and risk your life. I'm not doing that."
So,
I got better things to do.
Totally lovely and smart and true about the way you describe fear or anxiety about doing something fearful that will cause fear is that, and your mentor taught you this, everything is dynamic and there is no such thing as a contextless fear, if I can put it that way.
Absolutely.
There's this really great passage where you talk about that recollection and then you counter it by saying, yeah, well, the same person who's still afraid of the monkey bars or whatever we call those things can do this. It was namely going to Georgia, not the state, but the country in the middle of a civil war. And then let's add to that quitting a budding career as a writer at the New Yorker and so on to play poker. And that constitutes a hedge against that 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think this is a really important concept in psychology which is why Walter Mischel and the Big Five were not on speaking terms, which is that everything about decision making and about personality is situationally determined. There's no such thing as saying I'm, risk seeking or I'm risk averse. In what context? You always have to add that caveat. So I might be incredibly risk averse when it comes to physical risks, right? Like monkey bars, or I would never be caught dead on a motorcycle because I'm afraid that I'm going to be dead if I go on a motorcycle, right?
Is that one of your fears, really?
Yes, except I was a total idiot when I was an undergraduate and I was dating an older boy who had a motorcycle. And, even though
two mistakes right there, older boy and motorcycle.
Oh, it gets worse. He was in the theater program.
Oh, 3 mistakes. For you undergraduates, Maria has taught you something really important.
And he was like, "Let's take a ride on my motorcycle." And I'm 18 years old. I'm like, okay, I can do this. So I get on the motorcycle. I wore a helmet.
Okay.
But instead of going around Harvard Square, which is what I thought we were doing, he's like, "This isn't fun. Let's go on the highway." So we went on the I thought I was going to die. This is still to this day one of the stupidest things I've ever done and one of the scariest memories of my life. But yes, it is, and I will never do it again. I'm happily married, but if anyone were to ask me to go on a motorcycle for any reason, I would quote my favorite statistic, which is that motorcycles are actually much safer than cars because on average, you get into far fewer accidents, just one.
Oh my God. Thank you for that public service announcement.
But so to continue, you can have different types of risk-seeking profiles, right? So when it comes to physical risks, health risks, I'm incredibly risk-averse. But when it comes to other areas, I might be much more risk-seeking. So I was willing to go to a country where I had to hire a bodyguard to go around with me because it was so incredibly dangerous at the time that I went, because I wanted to learn. I thought it was a fascinating opportunity. I thought it was worth it. And so that, in some ways, is a very big risk, but a very different sort of risk.
Can I say that it was more than that, Maria? I mean, I don't know you, and I don't know you well. I've known you for an hour, and I don't want to psychoanalyze you, but you do psychoanalyze yourself to some degree in this book. But going to Georgia to do your senior thesis was more than that. It was a senior thesis.
It was
undergraduate. Yeah. So let's just say it was more than just a certain amount of risk taking. It was you were proving something to yourself or to your thesis advisor. That's a crazy ass thing to do as a senior in college. Go to Georgia in a civil war.
Yes, and adult me looking back thinks, what in the world was I thinking?
But something else was going on there, which is really important to this book. Even though we've talked about it already, I wonder if you could read this passage. It's 221 to the bottom near the bottom of 222.
Okay, guys, I'll read quickly.
No, it's fine. I'm sure they're going to love it, but...
This is the Georgia, right?
Yes, it's the monkey bars, the Georgia, and then poker.
So where do you want me to start?
If you don't mind repeating the scene on the playground.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Okay. And where am I stopping?
I think there.
All right, sounds good. All right. Scene. I give you stage directions. A 6-year-old me on the playground in the back of the subsidized housing complex we've just moved into. It's nothing fancy. A swing, a slide, a set of metal bars for climbing, swinging, monkeying around. Those bars are my nemesis. I desperately want to be able to hug the thin rail with my knees and swing down, carefree, hands dangling midway to the ground, seeing the world from an inverted freedom. My older sisters do it effortlessly, and oh God, how I want to join them, though I'd never say it out loud. I feel like a stupid, silly fraud. One of them taunts me. I try for what seems like the 100th time. I sit on top of the bar. I slide slowly down so that my knees brace against the top as I've seen them do. I start leaning back, and I can't let go. My hands won't let me. I'm stuck in an awkward half crouch and must once more admit defeat as I lever myself back up to full sitting position. I can't help it. I'm simply too afraid my legs will betray me and I'll go crashing headfirst to the pavement. All I can think of is my broken neck and how pointless of a way it would all be to die. "Scaredy cat," a kid yells. I am. I know it, but I just cannot let go. To this day, I've never swung upside down off a monkey bar. I've done headstands and handstands, dives and balances, but the playground remains unconquered. I'm a scaredy cat. Risk-taking scale score from 0, never takes risk, to 10, always seeks risks, -2, give or take. And yet, when I was in college, I decided that for my senior thesis, I would travel to Georgia, the country, not the state, and I would do so during a civil war. You see, I wanted to observe decision-making psychology in action, to experience how real people and real leaders reacted during real crises, not just ones that had been created in a college lab. And so, notebook in hand, I flew halfway across the world, hired a bodyguard, and made my way into the literal line of fire. What risk-taking score do I get on that one? How about for putting my career at the New Yorker on hold to play poker? Or for being too afraid to ever ride on a motorcycle, there you go. Or fly in a helicopter unless under duress. Or for moving in with my now husband less than 2 months after we met. Or for never having tried a single recreational drug, not even pot, because I'm too afraid to cause any sort of permanent damage to my neurons. At the end of it all, am I risk-seeking or risk-averse? The answer, as Walter would tell you, that's Walter Mischel, is it all depends on the situation. It's impossible to tell in the abstract. But at the poker table, it turns out, my profile, or behavioral signature, as Walter would call it, emerges in full. Blake, that's one of the people I had coach me, Blake, could pick up on some small physical habits that may give off information, and I'm certainly going to make every single effort to eliminate those entirely. But the more powerful tells could well be psychological. I shy away from small risks. In a marginal spot where a more aggressive player may call or raise, I'll just choose to fold. But given the right circumstances, I'm also apt to run insane bluffs for my tournament life. Observe me over a day at the table, and you'll be able to tell more about my risk-taking proclivities than people who've known me socially for years. It's a full life drama, years of situations and contexts distilled to one day at a tournament table.
And you go on to say psychological situation isn't stable because it isn't just about cards and actions. It's also about the emotional experiences and people involved. There came a point in your poker playing when people could get you off your game by being horribly sexist or saying awful things, and it's understandable that you would be thrown off. And you were clearly reacting or maybe overreacting given the needs of the situation. And so you turn to Jared Tendler, who is called a game coach, but he's a psychologist, but really it turned out to be a therapist.
Yeah, he's a mental game coach. And that, it's very funny. It took me a very long time to admit that I needed a mental game coach because I'm a psychologist.
Yeah.
I got a PhD in this shit. I don't need any help. And it turns out I did. Because I think this is such an important realization for anyone. You just don't see yourself objectively, no matter what. You just can't see yourself objectively. And you can't see yourself the way someone else can see you. And sometimes just talking through things with another person can help you understand some of the flaws and triggers and just hang-ups in your own reasoning. And poker, one of the things that I love about poker is that it's such an effective teaching tool for making you realize all of these things, because you have to put your money where your mouth is. And there's a feedback mechanism where if you don't deal with your issues, you are literally going to go broke. There's almost nothing else in life where there's just such a close connection. I went, for all of my adult life before I started playing poker with so many hangups and issues that I did not realize I had because I never had to deal with them. I could always explain them away. I could always say, oh, well, in this particular case, I chose not to engage in conflict because I want a long-term, relationship with this person. I didn't negotiate for a higher rate for this piece, even though I thought I deserved it because, I don't want this editor to get upset with me. And I could always rationalize and explain. And in poker, you rationalize and explain, and you look down and you have nothing left. And so you actually, that feedback is such a powerful learning mechanism and such a powerful way of forcing you to confront internal hangups that oftentimes, it hurts to admit that you have. I'll give you an example that I talk about in this book, but one that I think is very important. So I've always thought of myself as a strong female, right? As someone who has accomplished things and who is girl power representative. And all of a sudden, I find myself at the poker table and this asshole keeps calling me little girl. So I sit down and he's like, hey, little girl, welcome to the table. So little girl, does your husband play poker? Oh, little girl, did your husband buy you in? Oh, do you have a big hand, little girl? And just little girl, little girl, little girl. Now, I've been called everything at the poker table. I've been called, a bitch. I've been called a cunt. I've been called everything. And I'm sure there's, I see Jennifer in the front row who also plays poker. I'm sure you've been called everything, right? Yes, this is a pretty universal experience when you're female in poker. 97%, give or take, of the poker world is male, just to kind of give you a little bit of context. And usually there aren't any repercussions. But this guy calling me little girl just got to me and got under my skin. And he ended up knocking me out of the tournament because he got to me so much that I made a really stupid play against him. And the thing is, he did something wrong, but he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't actually call me a bad name. He just figured out how to press my button, and I let him. Yeah. And that was actually the most demoralizing thing of all, that I realized that he outplayed me, right? That he outplayed me psychologically. He outplayed me emotionally. And I realized that I was kind of that little girl thing hit on something inside of me that, I never wanted to confront, but now I kind of had to confront.
So that's where we get to Jared and the discovery. Mm-hmm. We're going to get to that in a second, but it's possible that we as readers, and you yourself as writer, but we'll just stay on the reader side, see this book as, really is Maria Konnikova really writing about poker? No, she's writing about poker. She's also writing about life and about risk-taking and about, but you're also trying to deal with, you call them hang-ups. You're also trying to deal with what triggers you. So doing this whole poker adventure was partly a way of saying, I want to get to the bottom of what is getting me. It turns out to be a question of identity and your very name. Yep. And so I want to turn to that in the book. It's where Jared, you describe it in classic psychotherapeutic terms as the root dash the real root, meaning this syndrome or whatever we're going to call it that needs to be discovered in your girlhood, in your past. Yep. And it following you know, the little girl being called little girl precedes this, but you're telling that story just before we look at this makes it really was a little girl coming from the Soviet Union, knowing no English. This is a traumatic moment. Yeah. I wondered if you would read just that paragraph and then tell us more about it.
We finally get to the real root of that one. I'm in kindergarten. It's the first day of school. I'm 5 years old, and my name tag is missing. Every kid has one, but my name is absent from the table. There's one name tag left, and the teacher insists on putting it around my neck. I shake my head. That's not me, I want to scream. Why are you insisting I be someone else? But I can't. I don't have the words. I speak no English. The only thing I know is how to write my name, my identity, the one thing I'm certain of. And now it's being questioned. I can't say any of this, of course, and so I cry, loudly and with abandon. I want to do the same thing now, whenever I feel out of place, like I can't control what's happening, except crying has become a less socially acceptable response. Jared calls this my Freudian breakthrough.
This couldn't be any more complicated. Because it's, Maria, it's imposter syndrome, which is the thing you're trying to get over.
Yeah.
In poker, being the one woman at the table, etc., combined with language, which turns out to be your profession. That's your real profession, if I may.
Yeah.
You're a writer.
That's right.
And this is the core trauma.
Yeah, it was. I remember that day so well. My sister, oh my God, my sister remembers it because she's 6 years older, and they had to. So I was in kindergarten, and she was just starting 6th grade, and so she had to miss her first day of 6th grade because they made her come downstairs to comfort me because I wouldn't stop crying. but it was. It is, I think, in many ways, it made me realize that a lot of who I became came down to that moment and to just that experience of being an immigrant who was placed in a world where you don't understand anything, right? You don't understand a single word. You can't communicate at all. The reason I knew it wasn't my name, by the way, is because I knew that I wouldn't be able to speak. So I made my mom teach me how to write my name, and I practiced it over and over and over so that I'd at least be able to write my name. So that's why this was so especially traumatic. I have no idea what the name tag said. I just know it didn't say Maria. But it must have been a girl's name. I hope. I don't know. No assumptions. But this was back in the 80s. So I think that a lot of how I came through that, obviously children pick up languages really quickly. And so by the end of that year, I was fluent in English and everything was fine. But I remember how closely I had to observe everyone and how closely I had to observe not just what they were saying, their words, but also the social interactions, because it was a different world. And we were immigrants who were refugees. We had, our passports taken away when we left what was still the Soviet Union. And we had no money. We had nothing. I was wearing hand-me-down clothes. I had to figure out who the, cool kids were and what kinds of clothes they were wearing and how I was supposed to interact. And I think that my twin interest in language and psychology probably come back to kind of that experience of being an outsider and of having to constantly observe and figure out, what makes them tick? How do I fit in? How do I get them to like me? And how do I communicate? And it made me, I think, always so appreciative of the power of language and the power of words and how important it is to have the precise word for things. Because if you don't have the precise language, you can't communicate what you're feeling. You can't communicate what you're thinking. And you might not even be able to name what you're thinking, right? It took me a long time to have the vocabulary to be able to go back in time and analyze this.
Yeah. Maria, this gets us to the importance of storytelling. And so I want to go to the confidence game for a second about that. Can I ask you, it's very storytelling on the part of the con person. Do we say con person? Con man?
Con artist.
Con artist. On the part of the con artist, storytelling is crucial. And you observe in a number of ways in this book that the story the con artist tells has to be left just open enough so that the victim wants to complete the story. Did I get that right?
Yep.
So this is like, these books are kind of twins in a way because of what we were just talking about. You said you wanted to learn the precise word for things because it's overcoming that childhood trauma. But the thing about bluffing and about the study of con artists is that it has to be a story that's open enough so that the other people have to figure out what it means. Not closed, but open. Can you help us connect the storytelling in confidence, in, what do we call it, cons?
Yeah.
And this desire you had later to do poker. They're very similar.
Sure. So I think, the confidence game is about con artists and how it is that we, and I do mean we because we're included in it, everyone here, are so susceptible to them. And at its heart, con artistry is about storytelling, and they are master storytellers. I think they're kind of the best storytellers in the world. And why that is because they tell us the stories that we already believe to be true. They don't show us the world as it is. They figure out how we want to see the world, and that's the story they tell us. So their genius is actually in reading people. And so it's funny because this is something that can be used for wonderful things, but also for very horrible things like con artists do. There's this wonderful con artist, very amusing con artist who did a lot of bad things from the 20th century. He was born in the 19th century, called Count Victor Lustig. He wasn't actually a count, but he styled himself a count. And he is quite a legend. He sold the Eiffel Tower not once, but twice to different sets of investors. So
you heard that.
Business school people, this is
sell the Eiffel Tower.
Nice. Yeah, for scrap metal. And he was able to do it twice because the first round of investors was so embarrassed that they never told anyone. So then he was able to do this scam a second time and raise money a second time until he was caught. He managed to con Al Capone, which was quite
daring.
Dangerous.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Worse than the monkey bars, I think.
And he had this very famous con that a lot of con artists use called the money box, which is a box that prints money. You just put plain paper into it and it prints money. And so he was arrested in a small town in the middle of the U.S. for this because, the way that it works is you just put some real money in there along with the paper, right? And then when the real money runs out, the machine stops working. But somehow while he was in jail, he managed to convince the sheriff of the town that it wasn't a scam, and he sold a money machine to the sheriff
while he was
from
in jail.
While he was from jail. So this is just to kind of establish his bona fides, and also because it's kind of amusing. But he wrote something called the 10 Commandments of the Con Artist. And I think the most important one, which actually kind of gets at the heart of this, is that a con artist isn't a good talker. A con artist is a good listener. So if you think about what that means, it actually tells you what the heart of a lot of successful storytelling when you're telling a story to other people is. It's actually paying attention and listening to people, to figuring out, how do you see yourself? How do you see the world? What are the stories that you believe to be true? And how can I mirror that back to you? Because everyone is going to question a story that doesn't make sense to them or that they don't agree with. No one questions things when it's something that seems like it should be right. You don't ask questions then. And so that's what makes a beautiful con story. That's what you were saying, leaving them open, because you become a participant in the story. The moment you're emotionally involved in the story is the moment you're dead. Basically, the con artist has won, and you are going to fall for this con. And that is something that is obviously incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands. And storytelling, I think, is just one of the most powerful weapons there. The pen really can be mightier than the sword in some ways. And so but the story is, doesn't have a valence, positive or negative. It's all in the hands of the storyteller. Yeah. So this powerful tool can be this amazing thing when you create worlds and novels and, nonfiction and all of these things, poetry. And it can be this horrifying thing when you're a con artist who's looking to take advantage of people and wrap them into your story. But I think the way that storytelling ties into what we were talking about with poker is that we con ourselves. We are great con artists of our own minds. We tell ourselves the story and the narrative of ourself. We're constantly telling stories that we want to believe in, of the type of person we are, the type of person we want to be. And we're constantly conning ourselves, and we don't want to be undeceived. One of the things that I write about in The Confidence Game is this bias that most people have. It's a better than average or optimism effect, which means that we see each other in slightly rosier terms than anyone else sees us. So for instance, if you were to give me a little, questionnaire and have me rate myself on a lot of different traits, and then you gave it to my best friend and you gave it to my sister, for instance, and my best friend and my sister would probably have very similar ratings. My ratings would be a lot more positive than theirs. And on the negative things, I would say, oh, no, I don't have any of those negative traits. And my sister would be like, actually, yeah, you do. And my best friend would be like, yeah, actually, you do. Right. So that's the better than average effect. And my favorite study of this effect that I talk about in The Confidence Game was done at Stanford Business School. And basically, the professor gave these questionnaires out, had everyone fill them in, collected them, told them about the better than average effect, then passed them back out and said, given what we've just learned, do you want to make any changes? And they did. And a lot of the students made changes. And what they did was make themselves even more positive on the positive things, because they said, oh, I understand, but I don't exhibit the better than average effect.
Not me.
I'm better than average. And it's funny, but it just says so much about human psychology. Now, I say almost everyone because clinically depressed people actually don't have this. So they are very accurate, and they rate themselves the way that other people rate them, which tells you something really important. Yes, this is funny and it's amusing, but these biases are psychologically really protective, and they can be very good for us. As what I say is a little delusion, though, goes a long way. Yeah. So it's very easy to push it a little too far. But poker forces you to actually deal with those delusions and to confront them in a way that would actually probably make you less susceptible to cons in a lot of contexts, because the number one step in not falling for cons, and also I think one of the most important things in being a successful poker player, once you know the basics, is the mental game, and knowing yourself and knowing your own proclivities and being able to counteract them. And it's not that you're going to stop having them. It's not that you're going to no longer have these biases, no longer experience these emotions, no longer get mad when an asshole calls you little girl. But you'll be able to identify that, and you'll be able to take it out of your decision process and remove it and actually account for it and think more clearly because of that added self-awareness.
Wow, Maria, thank you for that. That was amazing what you just said. I want to follow that with one last question for now, and then we'll get a portable mic and get some questions from the audience. I want to get a little further into storytelling, because having done this book and talked to people, both victims and storytellers, then and coming from your mentor, and then meeting Eric, your poker mentor, both of them taught you that framing is more important, weirdly, and writers know this anyway. Framing a story, framing a narrative, framing language is more important than the content of the story. It's everything. Framing is everything. And I think that a subtext of this book, I said earlier, is Maria Konnikova thinking about how important storytelling is, specifically writing and language, which gets back to that traumatic moment. In fact, at the very beginning of the book, you dedicate this to your dissertation director, and you say, in memory of Walter Mischel, I still haven't published my dissertation, as I promised you I would, but at least there is this.
Yep.
Right?
This is doing a heavy lift in that sentence, but I stand behind it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. This is the same thing, convincing your grandmother. Oh, you didn't tell her this, but you could have told her, this thing I'm going to do now is better, is I'm going to engage with living with uncertainty more interestingly if I do this than if I go the academic route. So there's this
and
moment.
I think Walter would have approved.
Yeah, I think he probably would have said, okay, where do I sign the dissertation or whatever, right? I
defended it. I just didn't publish it.
That's right. That's what you're saying. You promised him you would publish it, and you didn't, but there is this. Yep. And I took that very seriously, and when I got through to the point in the middle of this book, I'm going to ask you to read this in a second, where you actually create a language theory, a theory of language that has not that much to do with poker at that point. It's when Eric says, focus on the process, and you begin to recall the importance of framing. It's not a question of semantics. Telling bad beat stories matters. You'll explain that, I'm sure. Every time we experience something, we interpret it for ourselves. How we phrase sentences, not just stories, but sentences, can determine everything. This is the heart, I think, I want to say. I hope you don't mind. I think this is the heart of what you're trying to do as a writer overall. Did I overread that?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think, someone I quote here, W.H. Auden, who's one of my favorite writers and thinkers, has so much to say about, the close connection between how we think and our command of language. Bless you. And how important it is that, there's just a gulf between, the right word and the almost right word. And that it's so important to actually take the time to bridge that gulf. And I think that it's more important now than ever because we have the internet and we type all the time. And so the space between our brain and what comes out has narrowed, which is one of the reasons why this book and everything else that I've ever written was written entirely by hand.
Oh,
that is true. I write everything by hand and then I type, because when you write by hand, your hand can't write as quickly as it can type. And that is such a powerful tool for thinking and for clarifying your thinking. And yes, it slows me down. And I type, don't get me wrong. It's not like I have a secretary who types up my drafts. But I first write everything by hand and then I will type it up. And that's my first revision process because I see things and I'm able to make those changes. But it's that link between brain and hand is one that enables you to think more deeply and in a way that you do not think, you simply do not. And there's actually a lot of psych work on this, that you retain information better and that you learn much better if you take notes by hand rather than typing. So I encourage all of you, who are still students to actually ditch the laptops and take notes by hand. Seriously, it's gonna help you so much in class.
Really, really cool for you who haven't read this book is when you get to this section, it's right in the middle, where you realize that writing is a form of thinking.
Yeah.
Not thinking first and writing second. Writing produces thinking.
Yes.
That's what Auden is saying. Your job as a reader is to think, okay, what does this have to do with Maria going headlong into the world of poker? That is a profound analogy, I think.
And I'll just to add a female writer's voice to this, other than Auden, Joan Didion actually took this to the extreme, who said that she writes in order to find out what she thinks.
That's right. Famously, that's the title of her collected stories.
So I think it's a really, it's a great sentence and it's true. And I also write to find out what I think. I had no idea. I don't work from outlines. I didn't know what The Biggest Bluff was going to be before I wrote it. And you just kind of, you go on the journey and you let yourself go on the journey. There are a lot of fiction writers who say that they, don't know where their characters are going to lead them, right? That they end up in places they didn't realize they were going to go. But I would argue that that's true of any good writing, and that's true of nonfiction as well. You can't know your destination. You have to think your way to that destination. And as you write, you think.
So the imposter complex, which is an original thing, going back to that moment as a 5-year-old, leads to thinking about the biggest bluff of all, which is how we create a self that manages, in this case, the lack of language. You couldn't speak the language, and they didn't have a name tag for you.
Mm-hmm.
That is such an important originary moment for someone who's going to write a book that's called The Big Bluff.
The metaphor.
Right? And this that your mentor would have thought was the book is also you're just doing this. Bluffing. The biggest bluff is this thing that Auden is talking about, is writing and expecting thinking to come from it. Holy shit. Would you read this, and then we'll open it up for some questions, starting there and maybe starting there.
As it turns,
focus, and
absolutely.
then go as far as you want to, I guess.
Where do you want me to start?
I don't know, somewhere up there.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah.
Focus on the process, not the look. Did I play correctly? Everything else is just BS in our heads, Eric tells me. Thinking that way won't get you anywhere. You know about the randomness of it, but it doesn't help to think about it. You want to make sure you're not the person in the poker room saying, "Can you believe what happened?" That's the other people. This happens after I tell him a bad beat story, the one and only time I ever did. I haven't quite thought of it that way, but as always, the man has a point. How we frame something affects not just our thinking, but our emotional state. It may seem a small deal, but the words we select, the ones we filter out, and the ones we eventually choose to put forward are a mirror to our thinking. Clarity of language is clarity of thought. And the expression of a certain sentiment, no matter how innocuous it seems, can change your learning, your thinking, your mindset, your mood, your whole outlook. As W.H. Auden told an interviewer, Webster Schott, in a 1970 conversation, language is the mother, not the handmaiden of thought. Words will tell you things you never thought or felt before. The language we use become our mental habits, and our mental habits determine how we learn, how we grow, what we become. It's not just a question of semantics. Telling bad beat stories matters. Our thinking about luck has real consequences in terms of our emotional well-being, our decisions, and the way we implicitly view the world and our role in it. There is no such thing as objective reality. Every time we experience something, we interpret it for ourselves. How we phrase sentences, are we the ones doing the acting or being acted upon, can determine whether we have an internal or external locus of control, whether we're masters of our fates or peons of forces beyond us. Do we see ourselves as victims or victors?
Thank you, Maria. Did you want to add a word or two about what you just read, or do you think we've covered it?
Well, the only thing I will add for people who don't play poker is a bad beat story is when you get your money in as an overwhelming favorite and you lose. So you, quote unquote, should have won because the odds were overwhelmingly in your favor, and yet you don't. So in the particular story that I told Eric, I think I was like an 85% favorite. And what the human brain does is when you're an 85% favorite, it just rounds up to 100, right? 85 is 100. No, it's not. And poker will very, very quickly teach you that 15% is a hell of a lot. And it happens a lot of time. Even 99% is not 100. And so I was complaining. I was telling him this awful story, and he stopped me and he just said, do you have a question about how you played your hand? Because that's all that matters. Because if you didn't, I was like, well, I had top set and there was no, and he's like, that's it. Like, that's the end of your story. I don't care whether you won or lost. It does not matter. What matters is how you thought about it. Did you make the right decision? And the answer was, yeah, absolutely. I'd make this decision again every single time. And so that's the end. And if instead I focus on the outcome, it might actually perversely have really nasty consequences. Because in this particular hand, I bubbled the tournament, which means that I was the last person to be eliminated without making any money. And so next time, I might be in that same situation. And if I was dwelling on the outcome, I would say, you know what, I'm just going to fold top set. Which is horrible, right? You're never supposed to do that. But I might just come to that conclusion because I say, I know that someone else will get a better hand. Right. I'll look for a better spot. And so it makes you make wrong decisions. And, reframing that, not telling bad beat stories and forgetting them for yourself is such a Zen piece of advice in life, right? Let go of the outcomes that you can't control and just keep asking yourself, do I have a question about how I played that hand? Do I have a question about my thought process? Is there anything I would do differently next time? Focus on that. Don't worry about how it all turned out. And Eric will these days kill me if I ever tell him a bad beat story. He carries around a weapon just for that. No, he doesn't. It's a really important mental discipline in poker and in life to not go around telling bad beat stories and in writing. And if think about your friends, right? You have that one friend who's always complaining. There's always a bad beat. Like, I deserve this and someone else got it and I'm so unlucky. Like, that is not the friend you want to be hanging out with. I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's just, that negativity drowns everyone. Eric had a wonderful thing to say about bad beats, which is when you tell someone a bad beat story, it's like taking your trash and dumping it on someone else's lawn. And I think that just about sums it up.
Oh. So we have a portable mic. And where is that portable mic? All you have to do is raise your hand and be bold. We need somebody to be bold for the first question. We'll get the portable mic. And who's got a question? Come on. Here's one right here, and then Jeff will be second. Yeah, go ahead. Wait for the mic, please. Okay.
So, what was your motivation for becoming a professional poker player during your hiatus? And were you aware that some of the poker experiences would be applicable to other facets of your life?
Yeah. So I never had any interest in poker. Was never a games player growing up. As I talk about in the book, never even had a deck of cards in my house.
Did not know how many
cards were in a deck. Yes, embarrassed myself entirely when I first met Eric Seidel, one of the greatest players in the world, who went on to become my coach, by saying, I don't know much, but I know there are 54 cards in a deck. And he just looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry, how many?"
2 jokers, anyway.
I was sure there were 54. There are 52 for people who don't know. I now know this. And I actually came to poker through reading John von Neumann's Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, because I had basically a lot of really bad shit happened in my life. And so I knew that I wanted to write about luck, that I wanted to write a book about luck and the role that luck plays in our lives. That's not a book, right? That's like a philosophical inquiry. You can think about it, but that's not a book. And so I was trying to figure out what's the book. And so I was doing a lot of reading, and someone recommended I read von Neumann because game theory is an interesting way of looking at skill and chance. And I learned that von Neumann was a poker player, and that game theory came out of poker, and that he believed that if you could solve poker, you'd basically have a roadmap to solving all of life's decisions, that it would be what you wanted for strategic decision making. And, he thought solving poker would prevent nuclear war. He actually wrote that. Poker has still not been solved, sadly. I'm sorry. But so I was like, this is interesting. Let me look more at this poker thing. And when I started looking at it, it kind of clicked. And I said, you know what? This could be a way in. This could be the story. Why don't I learn poker? Get someone really smart, Eric Seidel, to teach me, and use that journey as a window into luck, a way of writing about skill versus chance, and of trying to figure out, how can I improve myself, my decision making, so that I maximize skill and learn to deal with chance in a smarter way than I've been able to up to this point. And so that was the origin of the book. And I didn't know at that point, whether I would be good or not. I didn't know whether I'd like it or not. I had no idea where the journey was going to take me, but I figured, I'm going to go on this journey. So I went on a book leave so that I could immerse myself completely in this world and see what happened. And I didn't know I'd become a professional player. That just happened after I ended up being good at it.
What did Remnick say when you told him? Did he have anything interesting to say?
No, he just compared me to George Plimpton, which everyone does.
And Plimpton at one point he went to play
George
football.
George Plimpton did everything. He just did stunt journalism. I'm saying this in the best way possible. Plimpton was a very talented person, but he just he did everything. He went to Vegas at some point as well.
Did, that's right.
Played football. He just liked to get
Paper
himself.
lion.
Yep. He got himself into a lot of things. And so it's funny, after The Biggest Bluff came out, people were like, so what are you going to learn next? Is it blackjack, or,
what you're doing,
is it chess? What is it going to be? And I said, no, I'm done. That's, I'm not going to suddenly, this is not my new roadmap for books. My next book is not going to be Maria Now Learns X.
Did Remnick mean that as a compliment? Yes.
I think so. I think he was excited to see where it would lead. Yeah.
Very cool. Jeff has a question here.
Hi. So by way of background, I'm a retired hedge fund manager, and we actually used to recruit associates and look for poker players.
Nice.
Because we felt that was better than a background of going to business school or being an analyst. And in addition to sort of probability, risk assessment, math acumen, what we liked was the ability to make a decision and commit on imperfect information.
Yep.
And I think what most people have trouble with, and even sort of young, Wharton undergrads, is they like to do a lot of analysis.
Wharton undergrads?
Even young Wharton undergrads like to know the answer and have as much information as possible. And when you have to make sort of a timely decision, right, making a decision on imperfect information and being able to live with it, right, is really important. So I just loved you to comment on this issue of decision making when, the probabilities are in your favor, but
absolutely. I
lose.
think that's kind of the heart of poker, right? Is, as I always explain it, your goal is to make the best decision you can with the information you have, knowing that the information is never going to be complete and that the decision is inherently going to be probabilistic, that there is no such thing as certainty. It does not exist. And that is just as true of every decision in life as it is in poker. Really, nothing is 100% certain. We might all die in the next 10 seconds. I hope we don't, but we could, right? Life is uncertain. And that's one of the reasons why von Neumann chose poker as kind of the game on which to base game theory, because both poker and life are games of imperfect information, of incomplete information. And it's scary. Human minds want certainty. We want to be able to round up 85 to 100 and round 15 down to 0. I give this example in the book, but after the horrible elections, yes, I'm going to be political, where Donald Trump won, and everyone was just devastated. People just vilified Nate Silver, who is kind of known for being a good predictor of elections, because they said, oh, you didn't predict this. He gave Donald Trump the highest probability of victory, and it was about 25%, if I remember correctly. And everyone just assumed that was 0. No, 25% is a lot. That is a huge, huge number. But the human brain just rounds immediately. And I think that it's so smart of you to hire poker players, because in poker you really learn what probabilities mean and what percentages mean. And you have to make a decision. You can't just sit there not deciding, waiting for perfect information, because it's never going to come. And I'll go a step further. When I just started playing, so a lot of beginning players have a problem of either bluffing way too much and being way too risk-seeking, or not bluffing enough and being way too risk-averse. And I fell into that camp, as you guys can probably tell from some of the things I've said. And so I thought I would be playing it safe by folding when I, wasn't quite sure if I was ahead. And if someone was being really aggressive, I'd fold just in case. And then all of a sudden I'd look down and I had no chips. And so my playing it safe actually cost me tons of money. And I was bleeding chips. And I realized that inaction is also action, right? If you keep waiting for more information and not acting, that's still a decision and you're still acting. And that's not the right decision, because you're using emotion and your fear of uncertainty, your fear that you don't have enough information, and you're kind of, I'm playing it safe. You're not playing it safe. You're actually just not being logical in your decision making. You're not taking the right risks because you're being emotional about it. And that was a very important realization for me. And I think that that's an important realization to just know that you have to act. And I'll say one more thing. Information might change. And when the information changes, the correct decision might change. And in that case, you should change your decision. And that is perfectly okay. That does not make you wishy-washy. That does not make you indecisive. It makes you smart. In poker, there's a term that I absolutely hate, and that term is pot committed. So a lot of times people say, oh, well, my odds are I already have so much money in the pot that I'm pot committed. So I have to call this bet because I already am committed to this pot. No, you don't. If suddenly your information has changed and you become pretty sure, not 100% sure, but your certainty that your beat changes and your information set changes and things change, fold. You are allowed to fold. You are allowed to fold even if you have almost nothing left, even if almost everything is in the middle. You're still allowed to fold. And that was a really important lesson for me to learn because I would make stupid calls because I was pot committed and the odds told me I should call. And the odds said, well, I only need to be right 10% of the time for this to be a profitable call. And so I should call. No, if the other information says you shouldn't call anymore, just fold. It doesn't mean that your calls were incorrect and you were incorrect to put this much money in beforehand. You had different information. And so I think that that's the flip side of it, that you have to be willing to act, but then you have to be willing to change your mind as well and walk away. And I think one of the most powerful biases that we have that really screw up our decisions in poker and in life is the sunk cost fallacy, which is putting good money after bad, good emotions after bad, good time after bad. You can't change the past. But what you can change is the present and what you do right now. So you can't take back the money you've already invested, but you can stop putting good money into that same bad pot.
I have been watching the expressions on people's faces in this last 5 minutes. I can tell that most people are thinking about the relevant thing in their lives, whether it's the Econ 1 course that is a sunk cost at this point, and maybe a late withdrawal is a good idea, or the used car that you have a new transmission for, and all those things. I mean, you can get personal. Do you know how many people are in shitty relationships just because they've already been in that relationship for so long? Much better to not put good money after bad. Sunk costs. Just watching people's faces, Maria. Oh my God. All right, we have time for one more question. Then I'm going to ask Maria to read what I think is the most beautiful passage in The Biggest Bluff. And who's got another question? We've got a couple people over here. All right, here's a question from a famous Wharton professor, so here it comes.
Who trains a lot of Wharton kids who end up going to Wall Street. I just had lunch with one of them today, and I pulled the book out and put it in front of him. I said, you know this book? He said, I don't. He read the back cover. He said, I know her. I played against her at the Wynn one time. She had an interesting poker handle. I said, well, how was she? What do you remember about her? And he said, she was very quiet. And it makes me wonder, you talk about the little girl asshole story. Were you ever the asshole? Did you ever find that to be your strategic advantage?
No. So the question is, was I ever the asshole? And I hope I never was. But that's actually, I think it's a really important question in a broader sense, because as I said, it took me a while to kind of find my inner aggression. But I also realized, and it took another coach who had kind of a similar style to mine to make me realize this, that it's not one size fits all, right? And being very aggressive works better than being very passive, but it doesn't work if you're not feeling it, and it doesn't work for all people. So you need to find your own personal style. And I realized that it was just so counter to my personality to play in a certain way that I was never going to be completely successful in that. So I needed to find my own brand of aggression, my own way of making this work. And so I'm never going to be the most aggressive player at the table. I will be aggressive. And it was funny. I was playing at a tournament recently, and a man asked me, who didn't know who I was, how I learned to play poker. And I was like, I learned as an adult. I had a really good coach. He was like, because you're such an aggressive player. It's so I just said, no, really? That's not how I thought of myself. But no, and I don't, I don't ever believe in being verbally aggressive, and quite the opposite. As I've become more comfortable in the poker world, I am always the person calling the floor and calling out anyone who's out of line, because I think that not enough people do that because they're not comfortable drawing attention to themselves. And I think we need to pay attention to that sort of behavior so that it's not acceptable. So these days I will call the floor whenever anyone says anything nasty, even if it's not to me. But most people don't say nasty things to me anymore.
Maria, toward the end of the book, you realize that there's the inevitable downturn. I don't know about inevitable, that there's a downturn. Things are not
inevitable always.
Okay, inevitable. And
regression to the mean.
And you decide to pull back a little, and you become very reflective as a writer, and it's the most beautiful part of the book. And I wondered if we could conclude this conversation. Do we borrow it again, or we could just read this?
Sure. Thank you.
It's on 317.
Okay.
And, of course, your grandmother makes a cameo again. 317, 318, the whole thing.
All right.
Yep.
So where am I starting? There is, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. There is, of course, the inevitable downturn. In the summer of 2019, I realized that I'm losing money for the year. I may have profited over $100,000 the year before, but now it's going in the other direction. Luckily, I have the tools to understand what's going on, the ability to not panic, to analyze, to study, to move on. I'm willing to leave my ego at the door and revisit my thought process over and over. I get into the habit of writing down the results of every all-in confrontation to see if I'm running at chance levels, and realize that I'm on the wrong side of variance. I'm losing more than my fair share of flips. It's reassuring. Variance plays both sides, and at least I'm not losing despite being on the right side. There are two moments of simple beauty. I've now learned to pause wherever I am, to appreciate the contrast between the table and the rest of it, to absorb and not just dread the travel. There's a synagogue in the late winter, snow covering rows of tombstones in the old Prague cemetery. A hint of my past, of the luck that it's taken for my bloodline to continue to the present day. There's a stooped figure of the grandmother with weathered hands as she grabs a fistful of newly caught razor clams in a tiny alley in Barceloneta and brings them up to my face with a smile. There's the soft-tufted head of the wide-eyed deer standing in our path in Red Rock one early morning when my husband and I take a hike before the start of my tournament so that I play with a clear head and ready mind. And there's this too. Though poker-wise, 2019 was not a good year for the Konnikova clan, personally, it is somehow as good as they come. My mother may not have gotten another job in programming, but she has learned the power of the career pivot and is teaching young children how to code. My husband did land on his feet soon after his last venture had shut its doors. More than on his feet. A job at one of the best-regarded investment businesses in the world. But after a while, he realized he was deeply unhappy, and in 2019, he made the plunge I'd long suspected he was destined to make into starting his own business. He told me that my new confidence, my transition to the poker world, the way it has changed my abilities, was what finally pushed him over the edge. I don't think that's altogether true. He's the one who has inspired me over and over, but I appreciate the thought. Whatever poker has done for me, it has been all to the good. Nu, the all-purpose Russian interjection of impatience, of motion, of readiness to move on, from, of course, my grandmother. Her 95th birthday is right around the corner, and her granddaughter seems to have taken longer than expected in the poker caper. Nu, can't you stop playing now? Maybe you can start teaching. Some things, it seems, never change, no matter how much I may accomplish and how far I might come. Some minds are not meant to be changed. I smile at her. Not yet, I reply. I don't think I'm ready to stop anytime soon. And she sadly shakes her head. But you gave such a beautiful talk at that conference. She's talking about the World Economic Forum in Davos, where I was invited to speak about poker and decision-making that winter. I'd like to tell her that no one knew who I was in Davos back when I was just a journalist. It took poker for the invitation to come, and my talk was all about my time on the tour. Instead, I just smile again. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. I keep going. One more tournament, one more game, one more stop. It's a sort of steady state, and I'm not quite sure where I should draw the line. Where do I decide I've learned enough? When is my mission accomplished? As it turns out, poker has one final lesson up its sleeve. I may not know where to draw the line, but life has a way of deciding for you.
Maria Konnikova.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so much. Also, let us one more time thank Stacy and Jeff Weber for making all this possible. Thank you guys. Love you guys. And Mingo Reynolds, who's probably running around, but Mingo, she's probably watching the Phillies. Oh, there you are. Thank you, Mingo. You're the best. We're very excited about this series, and we are excited. Typically, Maria, I will write this year's featured visitor and ask for some ideas about next year, so you count on me to be in touch with you about that. But let us one more time thank Maria Konnikova for this wonderful
talk. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you for coming to the Writers' House. If you go to the YouTube channel, the Writers' House, this recording will be up in like 5 minutes. And so you can pass that along to friends and family, like, say, hey, I just saw this, it's really cool. And to those who are watching live, hello. We have books for sale, $8. And it'll become so much more valuable when you ask Maria to inscribe it for you. So please,
absolutely,
please do that. And thanks for coming to the Writers' House, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.